We are very pleased to have organized this second Interreligion Forum of the Americas. This is a growing movement. 4 years ago, in the Lima Summit, we carried out the first Interreligious Forum of the Americas, but definitely this has a higher international participation with participants from different countries in the region. And also, this represents the very rich religious diversity of the Americas. This opening session started yesterday with our inaugural reception, and it was received it was welcomed by our brothers and sisters of the Interreligious Council of Southern California, and we had two very good presentations from Maria Celina from the organized OAS and by the coordinator of regional coordinator of the summit. And we are continuing somehow with this opening reception session. And we are opening this segment with the welcoming remarks from the organizations that have come together to organize this second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. But before we start off with that, we would like to ask everyone to stand up for a moment and to dedicate ourselves to the sacred in our respective faiths. And first of all, we would like to ask for the success of this interreligious event and also for the success of the Summit of the Americas, and especially because these efforts that we are doing as religious communities and the governments that participate in this summit, so that we can all dedicate these efforts to the common good of all our peoples.
Continuamos entonces. Bueno, me corresponde ahora invitar en primer término al secretario general adjunto interino de Religiones por la Paz Internacional, mi colega, amigo, mentor, el reverendo Masahiro Nemoto. Por favor, reverendo. How would you like it? Maybe from the podium, if you like.
Your Eminencies, Excellencies, good morning, everyone, friends. On behalf of Religion for Peace, it is a great honor for me to welcome you to the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. The purpose of this Interreligious Forum of the Americas is to provide a multi-religious and multi-sectoral platform where faith leaders, representatives of religious and spiritual communities, civil society actors, and policymakers can come together to support the government's convening at the 9th Summit of the Americas. As government leaders and representatives meet at the Summit of the Americas to discuss the most urgent matters in the hemisphere, we gather to provide unique perspectives on these issues. As people of faith, we believe in the moral imperative of supporting democratic freedoms, addressing inequality, promoting sustainability, and providing support to migrants and vulnerable communities. These principles guide us and give us the strength to act in the service of humanity and the earth. In order to solve the most urgent problems, we must embrace multi-religious collaboration. We must abandon the only this and only that thinking and behavior. In other words, we need to transform our mindset and attitude from the idea of only us religious people, only my religious organization, only my country, only my region, to collaboration between us, religious people, and policymakers, civil societies, academic circles, my religious organizations, and other religious organizations, my country, my region, and other countries and regions. We cannot afford to act alone. We cannot solve these problems unless we work together. We have dialogue, we should pray together, and we work together. For over 50 years, Religion for Peace has advocated for the power of multi-religious collaboration. Through our global network of more than 90 countries, interreligious councils, we see that when faith communities work together, their power is strengthened and become momentum. We are ready to expand our circle of collaboration, not only with religious leaders, but also with colleagues and partners from all walks of life who are committed to working together to promote human rights and positive peace. Each of us is an equal being who has been given a life of equal dignity of God, Buddha. There should be no discrimination in the equal dignity of lives. This word of equal is very important, very often lacking. We only say dignity of life. Then we hurt each other. Everyone has equal dignity given by God and Buddha. All religions teach this. This is the most noble act and mission of a child of God and Buddha. Whether true leadership is to stand above others and lead, or to stand below others and grow together while serving one another, the concept or philosophy of servant leadership has recently emerged. As you know, we as religious people, religious leaders must respect, trust, and serve each other and aim to build a society and world of mutual help and mutual benefit for ourselves and others. We hope to fulfill this mission entrusted to us by God, by Buddha, to build a society and a world where no one is left no one is discriminated. No one is left behind. Thank you very much for your attendance at this very important forum. I'd like to extend my hearty welcome to you all. Thank you.
Ahora sí, está bien. Sí, bueno, a continuación queremos invitar a un amigo, pero que también ha sido uno de los principales movilizadores para poder organizar este evento.
But he conducts and directs and mentors. And I'm, of course, referring to Professor Cole Durham. We are also inviting him to do his welcoming remarks.
So I thought I would, is this picking up? Yeah, I thought I would just remain sitting. And I hope I can say a few words about how this has all come together. First, just a footnote, some of you have noticed the FIDELA signs, and I'm going to betray my lack of Spanish here, but where that came from is the Spanish term for the forum is Foro Interreligioso de las Americas, FIDELAS. So if you wondered where that acronym is coming from, that's the answer. And we just thought it was too complicated to have two, so we didn't try to replicate it in English. It also made it easier to get name clearances for those of you who have dealt with that kind of issue. But going to the core of things, we have 5 co-organizers, and it's worth saying a word about how this came about. First of all, we're very much grateful to Religions for Peace, and particularly to Elias. Elias was the personal organizer of the first Interreligious Forum of the Americas when this was held 3 years ago in Peru. And he was the one who picked up on the notion that we should do this again this year. It's been a little bit of a more rapid time frame because the United States itself was a little slow in really starting out. So it was really about March that we figured we should do this. And we pulled together a wonderful team that included, in addition to Religions for Peace, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University, which is represented today by Gary Doxie. The ICLRS has had decades of work on the relationship between law and religion. Then we have had the benefit of Catherine Marshall at the Berkeley Center, and she's also the executive director at the World Faith Developments Dialogue, and has really, to my mind, she's really the global leader on religion and development, and has just contributed immensely to work in this area. And not only for the Forum of the Americas, but we've worked together for many years on the G20. We're also very thankful for the Interreligious Council of Southern California, not only for the wonderful event we had last night that many of you were attended, but just for their energy, for their presence, for their engagement. And symbolically, it's also significant. I'm told that I have it on authority from Los Angeles, so you can discount this if you want, but that Los Angeles is the most religiously diverse city in the country and probably the world. And I think that's probably a legitimately earned title. But it's meant that doing an interreligious forum here in Los Angeles was particularly significant, and we're so appreciative of the members of that council for all they've done to welcome us here and to contribute. We also need to recognize a number of collaborating partners who have made this possible. I'm afraid I won't name all of them necessarily, but we have the Episcopal Church, where we met last night for the event, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Islamic Relief USA, the John A. Witso Center here in Los Angeles, and many others. So thanks to them for their support. Now, my role, in a way, is here as a representative of the G20 Interfaith Forum, which is something that's been going on for many years. I'm currently the president, and Catherine is the vice president, and I have to admit, one of the appeals of this to me was it's become our practice to try and have pre-meetings before the global summit. We have some concerns this year that whatever difficulties we had in getting Mexico and a few other countries here, the G20 summit may have even greater difficulties. We'll see in the fall. But over the years, the G20, which represents some of the most, well, like 80% of the economic output on Earth, it includes the goals and objectives of the G20 in some ways, though they're more international, are very much in line with, or what's going on in this hemisphere is in line with the G20. So it struck me that there's a real opportunity. So from our perspective, not only will we be working on recommendations that we can make to the leaders here, but we will also be following up and working with what happens in G20 circles. And we have thought for a long time that we actually learned this in the Americas. I'm looking at, Javier Martinez, not Javier Martinez, Juan Navarro Floria, when we had this in the G20 in Argentina, noted that sometimes the host countries are so busy that we should focus more on some of the other partner countries in the G20. And 5 of those countries are in this hemisphere: Canada, the United States, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. And so what is the focus of what's going on in this some hemisphere has a great deal to say about what we should be thinking about globally. Let me just say a few things about what we've learned about this kind of event in the G20 process, with the idea that this can carry over and be relevant to what we do here. First of all, one of the things that becomes clear, particularly in interreligious circles, is that there are great common cores of values. These are linked to the idea of dignity, which has been mentioned, but there are also shared concerns on many fronts. Of course, the Summit of the Americas has tended to be focused on economic issues. Same is true for the G20. But what we've seen over the past several years is a growing attention to other issues, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, various other kinds of, let's call them more humanitarian or social kinds of concerns for the poor, the vulnerable. And these are issues about which religious communities have been wrestling and serving and dealing with for millennia, and to try and solve some of these problems without taking religious voices into account seems to be short-sighted. And so one of the things that's been going on, and this is clearly an aim here, is to heighten our awareness and provide a platform where we can come together and identify recommendations, identify areas that need more study, and so forth. I also want to emphasize that my experience is that while there's one kind of focus on generating messages that can go to the global leaders, perhaps even more important is the fact that religious communities are some of the great implementers. In terms of follow-through, we may be able to do things that the states never managed to get done. Obviously, we can push them and so forth, But I often think that it's as important to bring groups together, focus our attention on key issues, and then make sure that we work forward together, hopefully in cooperation with governments, but also in cooperation with each other. I think the other thing I want to say is I think there's particular promise in the Western Hemisphere. I remember a really forceful experience in my life several years ago speaking at a conference in Cordoba in Argentina, and I've told some of you about this experience. And I was talking about religious freedom, and I had some charts from the Pew Charitable Trust, and any of you who worked in these areas know these kinds of charts. And I had this global picture of where the greatest restrictions and problems on religious freedom were happening. And I have to tell you, Cuba was a very small scale on this, so you didn't notice Cuba. But the really difficult problems were all in the Eastern Hemisphere. This is not to say we didn't have plenty of problems of our own here, but we have actually learned to live together. And I think that that's something that it's a sign of a number of ways in which the Western Hemisphere, the New World, is sort of an old world now, but it's much less old than the old world. We have there's a kind of promise of our youth, our ability to take on problems. Our countries have distinctive and positive experience with diversity. So we have problems, but we have learned to benefit from the promise of diversity and pluralism. We've learned to learn from the promise of freedom and the promise of democracy. And we've willingness to listen to the diverse religious voices for different reasons. We have the promise that we can make a difference together. And I hope that's what will come out of this, our sessions here today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
And just like you were mentioning, Catherine, as a global leader in everything that has to do with the development and religion, I also consider her that way. And for many years, I have been learning a lot from her, and I keep learning a lot from her. And now I would also like to invite her to say her greetings. Catherine, please.
Muy buenos dias. Great pleasure to be with all of you. And I will add briefly to the very clear enunciation of objectives that my colleague Cole has given. The basic underlying notion that is driving us is that religious actions, religious voices, religious mores, principles need to be part of the discussions of the global agenda. And that is easier said than done. It is as part of civil society, but also differentiated from civil society. So the purpose, the underlying purpose, is to find ways to bring those ideas in concrete ways into these global discussions, whether it's the Summit of the Americas, the G20, G7, United Nations, et cetera. And I want to start with a very inspiring set of principles that Amanda Gorman, the poet, put forward that I think in many ways epitomize our objectives. May we not just grieve, but give. May we not just ache, but act. And may we choose our children over chaos. So this, I think, epitomizes this sense of both prophetic voice and of action. And we see this moment as a critical moment, what some would call a kairos moment, a moment of grace and opportunity as we emerge from this extraordinary crisis that we have all experienced with pain, across the world, the COVID crisis. And let's not lose this moment by muddling back to normal, but by taking the opportunity for fresh thinking. So we are working in many ways, all of us, on a very diverse set of agendas, but I wanted just to highlight a few of the areas that we see as particularly relevant here. I think in this polarized age, we see both a responsibility and an opportunity to bring together, to overcome the troubling, deep polarization which has driven so many countries. And it involves, at a very deep level, the problems of inequality, which are linked to injustice. And there are very few clear answers that are emerging, but it is, I think, one of the problems that we are grappling with. And it is linked to peace, to the questions of addressing violence, of finding ways to live together. So I think that that's an important, perhaps distinctive theme of this moment in time and of this place. We also see that the religious communities, in a deep way, are reminding and reinforcing the message of care for the most vulnerable, a preferential option for those who are poor and those who are suffering, and translating that into reality. And that clearly looks to the questions of children, where in many ways people in this hemisphere have been leaders in looking at child protection, at caring for children, looking to the extraordinary challenge of the fact that so many children in the COVID crisis missed out, that we have seen the veils stripped from the inequalities and the failures of education systems, but also the violence against women and children, which have become so clear in the course of this pandemic. So this human aspect of global agendas is something that we hope that these religious voices will bring. The questions of corruption are never very far from the agendas. They're framed as governance, framed as many other aspects, but again, the potential for leadership coming from this continent is enormous. And in many ways, this hemisphere is a leader on issues for the planet. The Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, where there are many representatives here who have worked on this for years, is a global critical factor, one that we emphasize as linking the vision, but also the action. And so the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, expanded to the energy transition, is inseparable from the global agendas that we look to. So those with the COVID pandemic and the need to look at health systems, the financial re-engineering, the issues of debt, all of those are prominent on the agendas. But in general, what we're looking to is finding ways to link what we might call fire from above, which is the prophetic voice, the prophetic leadership, the inspiration of the kinds of leaders who are all coming to Los Angeles today, with fire from below, which is the fire of communities, of individuals, and finding ways to link those in ways that help us to address both the polarization, but also the opportunities at this Kairos moment. So thank you.
As we were saying, thank you so much, Catherine, once again. And now we would like to invite our friend, Professor Gary Doxie, please.
Good morning, buenos dias. It's wonderful to be with you today. I am honored on behalf of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University to join with my colleagues in welcoming you here. The organizing effort has, I think, been nothing short of wonderful or miraculous because it came together in such a short time with so many other constraints and commitments that individuals in this panel had. So we're grateful, we're truly grateful that it came together and that we're with you here today. I don't want to repeat the eloquent points that have been made by my colleagues previously, but I will, this is probably a cheap way of saying I'm not going to repeat. I will reiterate. I want to reiterate just a couple of points that illustrate why we are here. Why did we choose to engage in this effort? Well, it's already been stated. Religion is at the foundation of so much in our societies. In our American societies, we might say even more so. In questions of healthcare, education, the moral foundations for the rule of law, which in their turn are the basis for fighting corruption and other evils that afflict society. So many other aspects, too many to name, make religion really at the heart, or should be at the heart of so many policy discussions, not because we hope that states and religion will cooperate in any inappropriate way, not because we hope that religion will somehow influence states more than they should, because we know that a certain healthy separation between religion and states is very important to upholding the rule of law, but because religion is in the very life of the people of this hemisphere as well as the whole world. It informs our culture. It informs our identity. It's at the heart of community. The Latin word for religion, religio, refers to ties that bind us together. It's about living in a collective, in a community where we get along with one another. A special, important aspect of all of this in the conversation must be religious freedom. Because if religion is the tie that binds us together in community, religious freedom is the mechanism by which we can live with religious diversity, with respect, with recognition of the equal dignity of every human being, and with ideals of equality for all. So religion and religious liberty, such important parts of our society, identifying factors in our individual and collective lives. They need a voice. They need a place at the table, not in inappropriate ways that would violate separation of religion and state, but in ways that give voice to, so that state actors can understand and recognize a couple of key things. One is that religion isn't going away. It's part of the fabric of society and must be recognized as such. Another is that the state cannot address all of the human problems. Religions do a much better job. They can enter where states cannot enter and help achieve sustainable development goals, whether they be from environment to poverty to anti-corruption or whatever they may be. This forum gives platform to those voices. That's why we do this. Let me add one last point. The vision, what we hope for as organizers of this forum, is that this forum is not a one-off, or in this case, a two-off, a second time, but that it becomes a repeat tradition with the organization, or excuse me, with the Summit of the Americas, and that we can work together with the hosts of the summit as well as with the Organization of American States to firm this tradition up so that it can become an active voice in helping move forward an agenda to fight societal evils which are so abundant and at this time of crisis and emerging from crisis in which we live. So that's our vision, that's our hope, that we can continue and fortify and build and strengthen these relationships. And I hope that each of you in this forum can build and strengthen relationships with each other, and going forward think about these topics with ever more ability to appreciate and implement as we work together. Thank you very much.
He's a friend of Latin America. He's been a friend for many years. You have many fans too. And we are very happy that the center has become associated with Religions for Peace, with the Barclay Center, and with the Interreligion Forum for the G20 to organize this forum here in the US. I believe that something that shows the interreligious character of this meeting is that we have been moving from a sacred space to another sacred space. We have had the pleasure to be welcomed by a house of the Episcopal Church. Today, we are here in the conference center of the Catholic Cathedral. Tonight, we will be having dinner at a house of the Church of the Saints of the Latter Days. And yesterday, we were at the house of the Episcopal Church, but we've had the great pleasure to be welcomed by our friends of our LA friends that have been essential to organize this forum here in Los Angeles. So I would like to invite Swami Mahayogananda to have his remarks. You all know that my last name is also difficult to pronounce, and that I can make a mistake when I say one of our friends' last names.
Swami, please.
Thank you, Elias. My name is Swami Maha Yoga Nanda, or Swami M for short. So it's a joy to see all of you. I'm privileged to serve as the current president of the Interreligious Council of Southern California, which is it seems, to my knowledge at least, the first such council, the oldest such council in this country to welcome all religious traditions to the table, founded in 1969. And I know that we have all the very good wishes of all our members that this gathering be a blessing for ourselves, and a blessing for the Americas, and a blessing for the world. I think the best way I know how to welcome you to this gathering is to share with you a prayer. It's an ancient prayer, first uttered by, we don't know who, an ancient illumined woman or man in prehistorical India. And it goes something like this. May we be protected together. That is, may we protect one another as we come together to learn from one another and support one another and address the challenges that we face, that we human beings face. May we be nourished together. May our coming together mutually nourish us. May we nourish each other. And how can it not be so when all of us here are dedicated to spirit, dedicated to the highest truth and to manifesting that truth in our lives? May we acquire strength together. Yes, together there is when we come together, there is great strength. We feel the power in this room. May we grow strong enough to know that ultimately we are all together and that there is no outsider, no us and them, that there is only us. May our learning, may what we learn shine forth in our lives. May what we learn here from each other together and what we create together here not remain as ideas in our minds or as words on paper. May they manifest in our lives, in our actions. What starts in the heart comes out through the hands. As we bring the fruits of our work here to our sisters and brothers. May we not find fault with one another. Okay, we all have faults. But as we come together, may we learn to overlook the flaws in our sisters and brothers and learn to correct our own shortcomings. May we learn to see an ocean in a drop of goodness. And may we not let our differences of opinion drive us apart. Peace, peace, peace. Our prayers always end with peace. May we touch that reservoir of infinite peace that lies at the very root of our being. May that peace arise in the hearts of all. May that peace manifest everywhere and in everything. So this prayer is traditionally chanted when we undertake a study of spiritual truth, when we prepare ourselves to receive the spiritual teachings. It's a beautiful way of understanding that we arrive at truth together. That's what I love about this prayer, that it emphasizes this togetherness. We come together. May we be protected together, nourished together. May we acquire strength together. May what we learn manifest in our lives, and may we not find fault with one another. So the illumined sage in our tradition sees that all of us are interconnected. In fact, we are all one. And there's this idea that in myself, I find everyone, every other person in myself. And a modern sage put it in this poetic form: not two nor many, 'tis but one. And thus in me, all me's I have. I cannot hate, I cannot shun myself from me. I can but love. That's from Swami Vivekananda. So may our coming together bring us such fruits, the expression of this oneness, this interconnectedness, which is love. Om Shalom Salam Shanti Peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swami. And now we would like to invite Jomana Cilian Saba. She's the Director of Policy and Discrimination Enforcement in the city of Los Angeles and an international trustee of Religions for Peace. But above all, she's a loving person. And when from the time she found out that we were organizing this forum, she fully participated and supported us so that Los Angeles would welcome us in the best possible way. Not only Los Angeles, but the faith communities here, taking into account that the city of Los Angeles has an interreligious council that advises the mayor. Jomana, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction. Good morning, honorable faith leaders, esteemed guests. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. We are delighted to host the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas, and I am honored to welcome you all to the City of Angels, a city that is a vibrant hub of multi-religious communities. As mentioned, we are, and we do take pride of being the most religious city, not just in the US, but in the world. We are a city of immigrants. We have about 4 million people that reside in our city, and we have more than 200 languages spoken in our city. Of course, Spanish being the second, and having the largest communities of Latin America. Probably anywhere else in the world. We do have some of the largest diaspora communities outside their native countries anywhere in the world. So we have, as a city, been a laboratory for not just diversity, but for religious pluralism. And it is in this very vibrant tapestry of Los Angeles that we find beauty and we find strength. We find beauty in celebrating our multi-faith traditions, but our core common values of love, compassion, and dignity of every human life. And we find strength as we come together to tackle some of the most complex challenges of our times. From climate change, to migration, to upholding religious freedoms, to racism, and to fostering social justice. We, along with our faith leaders, stood together to protect houses of worship, to speak out against hate and violence, and to bring our communities together in peaceful dialogue and understanding. Through my many years of working with faith communities in Los Angeles, I have been inspired by how communities came together to uplift one another in times of despair, crisis, and pain. Most recently, as we all faced a global pandemic that has taken the lives of millions, not just in the US, but around the world, and we know this number is not nearly reflective of the lost lives. But our faith communities here in LA found a way to respond. Our faith communities became hubs for food distribution, vaccine sites. They played an important role in helping those who have been the most impacted. Much of this credit goes to our faith leaders, many of whom are here today. There are several of them that I can't name all of them, but I know they are here. And I am personally grateful for this journey that we have been together along the way. I'm grateful for the compassionate leadership. And I think, as was mentioned by some of the previous esteemed speakers here, this idea of religious freedom and the idea of where and how government interacts, we in the city of Los Angeles have truly found our strength in our faith communities and our faith leaders. So this idea of a compassionate leadership and faith leaders being a voice of reason and a positive force for change is something that we here at the city have uplifted and upheld. It's these complex challenges that are not unique to LA or the US. These are global challenges that cities in the Americas and cities around the world are struggling with. The UNHCR most recently estimated that the number of forcibly displaced people is now 84 million, and over 26.6 million refugees. 689 people live in extreme poverty, or they live on less than $1.90 a day. Democracy, religious freedoms, human rights continue to be threatened by authoritarian regimes and regional conflicts. These numbers seem daunting, But they're even more daunting because these are not numbers. These are human lives. These are brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, communities. But as daunting as this seems, as a person of faith, I stand with you in hope with all of us in this room, that we, no matter our differences, shoulder this responsibility to seek diverse responses and to fundamentally uphold inclusive, democratic societies that foster peace, harmony, and stability. It is our ability to dialogue and to share in this learned space and to find brave solutions together. And I know several of the points that were made earlier this morning are truly the essence of why we are gathered here. And I am just so excited that it is the city of LA that is hosting this forum and welcoming this multi-religious assembly to identify areas where we can not only learn from each other, but we could also come up with solutions that fundamentally can uplift our communities, no matter which city we are from and no matter which city we live in. It is about the vision, it is about our will to bring together these diverse perspectives and multinational solutions. Something that I know Religions for Peace has been doing for more than 50 years, with interreligious networks across the Americas, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Through these networks, Religions for Peace continues to be a significant and to make a significant impact in cities with some of the most direst needs. I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to Religions for Peace, the Latin America and Caribbean Council for Religious Leaders, the G20 Interfaith Forum Association, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University, and the International Center for Law and Religious Studies, as well as our very own Interreligious Council of Southern California for organizing this forum. I know this has been a heavy lift and it's been an uplift, but here we are today, and it is such an exciting morning that we are here together. I look forward to our deep exchanges, our meaningful conversations and contributions over the next 2 days, but quite honestly, I am more so looking forward for what is to come after those 2 days, because this dialogue doesn't end here, it starts here, it has started, continues, and it is our abilities to take those solutions back through our own networks across our cities, across our countries, across our multinationalities. So with that, I thank you once again for having me here, and I am grateful and looking forward to what is to come. Thank you.
So with this round of applause, we would like to say goodbye to all of our friends here. And now we are going to invite the panelists of the first session that we will have. And that is about the contributions of religions to building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future in the Americas. So please, once again, a round of applause for our panelists. So now we are going to go back to our session. We have Ms. Rogers in the screen.
Bueno, por una cuestión digamos, de logística, vamos a primero invitar a presentar su exposición a la profesora Melissa Rogers. Ella es la directora ejecutiva de la Oficina de Alianzas Basadas en la Fe y Vecinales de la Casa Blanca, lo más equivalente a lo que nosotros conoceríamos
faith communities of the White House. This is equivalent to a Secretariat of Religious Issues in the US. This is very different from from how this works in Latin America, because the constitutional situation here is very different. But we wanted to offer this explanation for those who are not that familiar with how the American system works. Professor Rogers, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, it's great to be with all of you, and I bring you warm greetings from President Joe Biden. I want to thank my friends, Professors Cole Durham and Catherine Marshall, for the invitation and for their friendship and for their terrific cooperation in helping to form this terrific gathering. It really is an impressive effort, and one that will be sustained over a period of years, as was just mentioned, which gives us a lot of hope for the future. I also want to thank so many other friends who are gathered here, including my friend Rabbi David Saperstein, former Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, and Jim Wallace, and again, many others. And I'm so pleased that my colleagues, Ambassador Rashad Hussain, the current Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, and Adam Phillips, who directs our Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the United States Agency for International Development, are also able to join you for the conference. In addition, I want to thank everyone gathered here for your leadership and your willingness to collaborate. And congratulations and thanks for doing the hard work with your colleagues of establishing this interreligious forum. This morning, I want to affirm and encourage three things that will help promote healing, especially for the most vulnerable, build and help us to build more unity and otherwise strengthen our communities worldwide. First, let me say that partnerships between the government and religious leaders and faith communities are not optional. They are absolutely essential. So how can we increase, expand, and align these partnerships in ways that respect cherished principles of religious liberty, including the separation of church and state? More than 20 years ago, President George W. Bush established the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, as it was then known. And he said at the time that government cannot be replaced by the efforts of religious and other community organizations, but government can and should welcome such organizations as partners. And he was right. And indeed, we have seen that the correctness of that statement has been recognized not only by President George W. Bush, who was known as a Republican, but also by subsequent presidents of different political parties. President Obama continued the initiative that President Bush started, this partnerships initiative. And now President Biden has continued it as well in his own administration. So this is a great bipartisan tradition and signals what is absolutely true, is that people of different parties, of different ideological and political beliefs can and should work together in serving people in need. And that gives us such a strong foundation for this work. Well, what are some of the other reasons government can and should work with willing faith and community partners? There are so many reasons, but let me just quickly mention some of them through using the example of our work with faith and community partners to combat COVID, which is work that obviously continues. Early in this administration, the United States government began mobilizing vaccinators and vaccine sites, including community health centers and pharmacies. But President Biden also recognized that faith-based organizations and religious leaders should be welcome to play key roles in this effort as well. After all, houses of worship are pervasive and familiar to many Americans, and religious figures are among the most trusted community leaders. The vast majority of them are enthusiastic and about helping the country and other countries, our country and other countries, get vaccinated. Now, of course, religious leaders see this mission as deeply spiritual. At the same time, the government sees that same mission as secular. Helping more people get vaccinated protects not only their health, but that of their families and their neighbors. So we saw in the United States that congregational leaders made their buildings available as vaccination sites while also working the phones to sign people up for appointments and providing transportation for those who needed it to appointments. We saw the birth of the Faiths for Vaccine Coalition. This was a coalition that was put together by a number of very experienced leaders, including Catherine Marshall and others, when the pandemic hit. They quickly formed an impressive and cohesive body, one that spanned many different faiths and beliefs and continues in operation today. Once established, this coalition flew into action and worked and continues to work very closely with the United States government. No matter how tough the problems we face, we are always encouraged when we leave our meetings with these groups because we know there are so many hands to help and we know we'll get the job done together. Now, as I said, of course, this work continues in our country and around the world, but it's just one snapshot of the important and indeed essential roles that faith leaders can play in working with government to address issues of shared concern and so importantly, to address the needs of those who are suffering. So in short, if we want to meet our community serving goals, partnerships like these between government and religious leaders aren't optional. They are essential. So I hope at this conference we can talk about several questions, including how can we learn from other governments and civil societies worldwide about best practices in these partnerships? What steps are necessary to ensure that we respect religious liberty for everyone in these partnerships and beyond? What does government need to better understand about the roles of religious communities in addressing needs, and especially in reaching hard to reach populations, which is what religious leaders often do so well? Second, I'd like to just encourage attention, as has already been mentioned, to promoting in an even wider way the principle of religious liberty for people of all faiths and none, and for countering hate in all its forms. There's stunning religious diversity on display at this conference, but you haven't been content simply with civic peace across faiths. Instead, you are regularly seeking to make common cause with people of different faiths and beliefs. You have affirmed that no matter our differences in belief and background, we stand together as individuals of equal dignity and infinite worth. And we will go to bat for each other's rights, recognizing, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. That commitment provides an excellent foundation for working together authentically, equitably, and productively. So how can we use that foundation to take new steps to counter the rise in hate that we are seeing? How can we make sure that the many more people who agree with us, but have not yet moved off the sidelines, can be encouraged now to speak out and to be in solidarity with multi-faith coalitions like this one? I'm really looking forward to hearing your ideas about that important challenge. And finally, let me say that, as we all know, working to build bridges across other divides is important today, including ideological and political differences. We all know that that work has never been harder. We also all know that that work has never been more important. At a time of far too much polarization, thank you for continuing to defend each other's rights, to seek common ground, and to consider how this movement can be grown. There's so much that unifies us if we're only willing to look for that unity and work side by side, as all of you have been and continue to be. This conference gives us so much hope. Here again, there's much that we can do to strengthen and broaden the collaboration that's represented in this room and at this conference. And we look forward to hearing your wonderful ideas about how we can work with you more closely on all of these initiatives. So let me close by saying thank you again for all that you are doing, for the time that you will spend at this conference, and for your leadership. We look forward to continuing to work with you to help communities heal, unite, and rebuild. Thank you again, and Godspeed.
Thank you very much, Professor Rogers.
And now I would like to invite a great friend, a woman who is a great example of faith religions in Latin America and the Caribbean. She is the coordinator. She has been the president of the Reformed Churches of Latin America and Presbyterian Church. And right now, she is also a coordinator of the Latin American and Caribbean Women of Faith Network. Gabriela, please. It is a pleasure for me to greet you and have the opportunity to share my views on this topic from the point of view of a simple person who lives her spirituality in a small but active faith community, a community that works there where it's needed. In the south of this America, so united in some aspects, we call ourselves brotherly peoples, but at the same time so divided and hurt by injustice, lack of solidarity, the violation of basic rights for a dignified life, forced migration, and a huge gap between a few people who are too rich and millions who cannot meet their basic daily needs. This is our reality, at least our reality in the south of the American map. It is not news that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light the pre-existence of previous pandemic linked to the lack of value of human life. I've already mentioned some of them, but let's add to this one the inability of the states in general to deal with an emergency due to the scarce and deteriorated infrastructure of health services, emotional containment, shelter, and economic response to a sudden crisis. Faced with this post-pandemic postcard of the world, how can religions contribute? What can or should be the contribution of our spirituality? I share some ideas by way of challenges. Brandon Vaidyanathan, and sorry for the pronunciation, director of the Department of Sociology at the Catholic University of America, in making public the conclusions of the study on mental health in religious communities, in which more than 1,600 people of different faiths participated, said that people who are active in religious communities tend to have higher levels of well-being, and we found that this was also the case during the pandemic. Here is a first essential point. Faith communities have within themselves a resilient potential that allows them to cope with crisis in a creative way and become spaces of containment, welcome, of rapid and effective response to the demands of any crisis. For this reason, at a time when there is talk of a wave of secularization, our places of faith must strive to keep alive a committed spirituality and in permanent dialogue with reality in order to be able to respond from their faith to the constant challenges that call for their witness. Community resilience, in this case, ecclesial resilience, refers to the capacity of the community body or membership and the institution or structure to cope with adversity and to subsequently reorganize itself to improve its structure, its celebratory experience, its teaching, its witness, and its spiritual identity. Secondly, many of our faith spaces have the capacity to build bridges with other organizations in order to enhance their capacity to contribute to improving the often unjust present. An example of this is our small church in Buenos Aires, which together with the evangelical social outreach in Argentina, which is made up of communities, churches, and evangelical organizations with a deep commitment to the vulnerable sector, supports community soup kitchens, community food banks and closets, workshops and social inclusion programs, health posts, work units, and as part of the proclamation of the gospel, and at the same time, assuming a prophetic role, denounces and opposes all exploitation, fights to eradicate violence, and invites to live and build community from another paradigm, that of solidarity. But beyond the concrete action in service activities, faith-based organizations also have a high capacity for advocacy in the articulation with state agencies and international bodies such as the UN and other spaces. This necessary voice can and should be strengthened from places of positive confluence as these spaces now, but not only from here, but also other spaces in order to clearly indicate what this time demands from those who are in power to decide in favor of the full life for every human being and for our creation that cries out. It is our because we live here. Our present is a present of absolute inequality. And from this point of view, the future is not sustainable, but it's not viable. There is not much time left to turn this history of prolonged injustice over time. Our planet and its inhabitants demanded. From our place as religious organizations, we must promote these three aspects that I have humbly mentioned. One, revaluing our spaces as resilient places with creative capacity to face crisis and to make significant contributions to the restoration of a full and dignified life for every human being and for the whole creation. Two, strengthen our capacity for service, revaluing the witness of of concrete love for each person in need. There is no salvation possible in selfishness and in any proposal of individual freedom. Salvation is a community effort and is based on solidarity. Three, advance in joint initiatives to influence the states at all levels and international organizations with a clear prophetic voice that demands radical changes that will improve our present and that shine a glimmer of hope in the future of humanity. We have a big task ahead.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. And now we would like to invite Elder L. Clayton. He is an Emeritus General Authority and former president of the 70 at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Please.
Thank you very much, Elias. And I'm delighted to be with you this morning. It's an honor to be in your company. I would share with you as I begin my love for all things Latin American. I lived as a young missionary in Peru for 2 years. With my family, I lived in Buenos Aires for 4 years. I've been to nearly every country in Latin America multiple times, and to most of them many times. Everything about Latin America is part of my heart. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much. I would share with you a few points that seem to me to be central to what it is that we're trying to do together. I hope that they will be helpful to you. I am concerned that there is a tendency around the world to discredit the benefits of religion and the benefits of religious activity. It seems to me that it's so easy to bemoan the world and its conditions. But in my view, there is a simple panacea, nearly a perfect remedy to cure the ills around the world. It's a strong dose of religion. I believe that as people become more religious, their contributions to society improve, and our ability as societies to grow and to nurture each other improve as well. It's easy to fall into the trap of judging religions harshly, especially in view of the abhorrent behavior of a few practitioners. There's no defense for such actions, but similarly, there is no defense for asserting that abuse by any group or any individual is somehow an excuse to accuse everyone who is a religionist of equal culpability and to throw them all out with the trash. It seems to me that doing so would come at a very high cost. The benefit of religion in addressing real problems on the ground, as we've heard today, with refugees, with inequality financially, with extreme problems across the continents of North and South America and throughout Central America, all of these ills are all too well known to each of us. But the benefits of religious activity with addressing these problems are incalculable. The light in the eyes of a child who has received a brand new little wheelchair is a small reward for the person who donated that wheelchair or made it possible, but it's a real reward. It seems to me that we need to help our religious institutions continue to excel at what we do well and in sharing these burdens together. What we do may not sell newspapers, so to speak, but it is better than stories about shootings and stress and about turmoil and terror. One thing that we have in common, I believe an important point that we have in common, is that nearly every religion across the world shares a belief in thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, or its corollary, its close corollary, the Golden Rule. I could give you examples, I have them written here today, from Islam, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, the Baha'i faith, from Taoism. Essentially, they all say the same thing. There's an underlying concept that I believe gives strength to the thou shalt love thy neighbor concept. And it is that as believers, as religionists, we all also believe that ultimately we're responsible for our conduct and that we will, in one way or another, at some time or another, render an accountability and a report about how we have used our lives. Thus, what we do in religion matters. It teaches people, we help people to be accountable for their conduct. That's an important contribution to the purposes of this conference. It's important also to recognize the benefits that religion brings to government. We stand with government to help them in all that we do, but we also ask that governments infringe upon our rights as lightly as possible. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe the following. We believe that governments have a right and are bound to enact laws for the protection of all citizens in the free exercise of their religious belief. But we do not believe that they have a right in justice to deprive citizens of this privilege or to prescribe them in their opinions so long as regard and reverence are shown to the laws and such religious opinions do not justify sedition nor conspiracy. A third point I'd suggest for your consideration is that we should work together by affirmative, conscious decision to achieve the common good. I believe there are many more things upon which we agree than we disagree. There are common elements that we can seek to obtain to benefit society as a whole. We don't need to agree about doctrinal points. We just need to look around and see people who could use a hand. We need to see a need, cross the street, and then go to work and get our hands dirty together. Fourth, in my points, I'd suggest that we are more likely to be effective in working with government if they see us as part of the solution and not another problem to be addressed. When we begin to help government see how we can help solve some of the challenges that governments confront, I believe our capacity to be of assistance will be enhanced. The next point is about fairness for all. I'd like to suggest that the need to support families is an important consideration for all religions. I know that the topic of family is fraught for some, and that the definition of family is a topic of debate in some quarters. We may disagree about what family means, but perhaps we could agree that we will all do all we can to promote legislation that fosters the well-being of families, regardless of how that family looks, if it is necessary to protect the kinds of families we do recognize. In this regard, let me explain what Fairness for All suggests. Fairness for all means recognizing that LGBTQ people are entitled to housing, to medical care, insurance, and employment, while at the same time, religions and believers are entitled to promote their beliefs in the public square and free from government intrusion. It's fairness for all, fairness for everyone. I believe that fairness for all helps build sustainable and equitable and resilient countries. In closing my comments, I ask you please to consider the central role of human dignity. With respect to all of the concepts I've mentioned and how religion can contribute, I would suggest that human dignity is the underlying concept that ties us together. I think of human dignity as the divine spark in every human being, regardless of birthplace, wealth, educational attainment, race, color, creed, belief, and so on. To recognize human dignity is to acknowledge that each one of us is just as real and just as alive and just as important as is every other one of us. Surely more affirmative and constant awareness of human dignity will help contribute to building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future in the Americas and everywhere. Thank you very much.
Affections for Latin America. Actually, recently we were together in Peru. He was there with his family. And we are so happy to see that personal commitment that you have with the region. Now we would like to invite Rabbi Gustavo Crocentlic. He is one of the commissioners for the International Dialogue. Also, he's part of the Jewish Congress, and he is also president of the Interreligious Committee of Panama. So welcome, Rabbi Gustavo. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I feel very honored for this invitation. Please receive my greetings. Just as Elias was mentioning, I have two hats. On the one hand, I am representing the Latin American Jewish Congress, and also I am part of the Interreligious Committee of Panama, along with Julio Murray, who is also with us today. I would like to also thank for the possibility of being part of this second Interreligious Forum of the Americas, and for the opportunity to share about some reflections about our role as faith communities in the region, especially during these very complex and challenging times. I would like to confess that when I was trying to carry out an analysis about where we are standing, in my mind, I could think about those experiences that I believe we all have had these last years, and that generates some mixture of sensations and feelings. And I can think about the words from Charles Dickens and the ones that he uses for one of his novels. And I quote, "It was the best of the times, it was the worst of times, the age of wisdom and the age of craziness, that time of belief and disbelief, that time of light and darkness, that spring for hope, but the winter of desperation, End of quote. It was written in 1859, and his words are deeply current. We are today here hoping that the pandemic of COVID-19 that hit the world with an unimaginable intensity starts to slow down. And this was definitely something that hit the Americas real hard. According to WHO data, we had 3 out of 10 cases that were confirmed of contagions and 4 out of each 10 deaths. These are impressive numbers taking into account that our region is only 15% of the world population. During the pandemic, we have been witnesses also in many of our countries of corruption activities in the middle of the emergency at a bigger or a smaller scale. Selfishness, that idea of saving yourself first was still prevalent many times, leaving us with a sensation of frustration and lack of hope. And today, by overcoming these threats, we are starting to feel the awful consequences of the lockdowns and the pandemic and how they negatively impacted the development of our societies. In Latin America, the advances that were achieved in the last decades were gone. And our region has gone back many years according to all of the indicators that can measure its development: health, education, poverty eradication, and a very, very long etc. The Sustainable Development Goals have become an unattainable fantasy. It is the worst of the times. However, during the pandemic, we also managed to perceive the different types and gestures of empathy and solidarity, starting with the commitment from all of the healthcare professionals, all the way to the very small gestures that were filled with kindness in each part of our region, the resilience of people and the organizations to be able to give response to situations that we would never think of. They are the ones that nurture our optimism. And also the pandemic made it evident how important religious organizations are as a contention space during these very hard times. That message of hope from all of the religious traditions brought relief in the midst of anguish, and their capacity to give specific answers in the middle of the crisis also was a fundamental support for so many people. That is why I think that we have the opportunity of this being the best of times, because we have come together here, religious organizations, together in our diversity, along with the generators of public policies, so that we can go deep in our commitment of moving forward to try to solve the issues that have an impact on our populations, focusing mostly on the most vulnerable, the oppressed minorities, immigrants, and those that are falling out of the system. And it is that our region, I would like to say this very humbly, can give testimony to the world of the capabilities that religious leaders have of acting together beyond their differences to fight for human dignity by taking into account common values that come from faith and that also are translated into that capacity of seeing the others as a sibling.
Was created in the image of the divine. Every human being is a divine creature. It is this radical as to interpolate each of us from the point of view of faith and assume the idea of being a protagonist in the building of inclusive societies, harmonious, equitable, and sustainable communities. Based on our sensitivity in the eyes of the suffering of our brothers and sisters, we must reaffirm our commitment to work jointly to give an answer to the urgent needs of our peoples. That is my wish. So for this forum, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rabbi Gustavo. And now I would like to invite Professor Alejandro Werner, Director of Georgetown Americas Institute. This institute has been very recently created. I believe that less than a year, but that has um, acquired prestige very quickly. And we believe it's very important to have Alejandro's presence here today because he will share his vision from the academic point of view of current issues. Alejandro, please. Thank you very much, Elias. Thank you, Catherine, for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here in the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas.
I'll switch to English. I feel a little bit overwhelmed by the initial speeches and remarks, and I'm a little bit sorry to turn it down into something a little bit more technocratic and economic and talk about numbers, when I think religions have a big role to play in Latin America, given the even larger challenges that the region will be facing in the next decade as countries exit the COVID-19 pandemic in an environment in which, as Gabriel was saying, I mean, social conditions have deteriorated. From a social cohesion point of view, the region is more divided, more polarized, more violent, and facing even deeper problems than before. And I think governments are not playing the role of united societies behind a common, I'm generalizing obviously, but behind a common goal. But in many instances, they're playing to these divisions that I think undermine the capacity of the state to really undertake the big agreements that Latin American societies need to move forward and to avoid, I think, the most dangerous scenarios that might develop in these challenging times. I think as we exit the pandemic, as it was said, I mean, the health numbers doesn't show a nice picture for Latin America and the Caribbean, concentrating a significant percentage of the deaths around the world, contagions, and given a much smaller share of the population. Something similar happened on the economy. I would say on the bright side, vaccination campaigns were much better than what we expected in most of the countries in the region, and that together with learning to live with the pandemic allowed economies to reopen faster during 2021 and have a 2021 in economic terms that was much better than what people expected. However, I mean, exiting the pandemic, Latin American societies face many challenges. I will mention 4 important gaps. I mean, there's a very deep economic gap. I mean, Latin America contracted by around 8% in 2020, then it recovered by 6%, 7% last year, but it's expected to grow at around 2.5% this year. That means that, and then I mean, economic analysts estimate that Latin America will continue to grow at around 2.5–3% in the following years. That means that if we compare where we expected Latin America to be in income per capita before the pandemic, where we expected Latin America to be, let's say, in 2024, and where are we now expecting Latin America to be in 2024, we will be 4 or 5% below where we expected it. And that will repeat itself in 2025, in 2026. So this gap will never close, and that implies that the pandemic is making Latin America lose around $200 billion per year going forward, in addition to what we lost during the pandemic. And that loss will be most heavily concentrated on the poorest segments of society. This was a crisis that affected, in terms of the labor market, the service sector much more than manufacturing. And in the service sector, we have the people that are least educated, the youth, women, etc. So in addition to having these aggregate effects for the whole economy, these aggregates are distributed in the worst shape possible, significantly biased to those less well-off. And that points to the social gap, again, that Gabriel was mentioning. I mean, with significant deterioration in income inequality, the reversal of the gains we had made in terms of poverty alleviation, and a very important problem that was developed during the pandemic is that Latin America was a region of the world in which kids had the least presential hours of instruction during the last 2 years. That means that school desertion will increase. That also means that the difference between kids that go to public and private schools will widen, and that will have permanent effects in terms of violence, in terms of income distribution, etc., in Latin America. So it's very important to act fast, basically to put in place remedial measures to try to close this education gap as much as possible. We have an important legitimacy gap in Latin America of the social economic equilibrium is not perceived by the majority of society as being fair, and that covers many, many aspects of our socioeconomic system, from public education, public health, from market concentration to public policy like taxes and expenditure, to the way that our judicial system works. I mean, if you're a household in the lower 10% of the income distribution, the treatment that you will have when you have to deal with the judicial system is completely different than if you're a family within the 1% of the top at the income distribution. So in that sense, there's a feeling of an unequal treatment by very important institutions in Latin America as well. And Latin America will confront important fiscal gaps. I mean, there was a lot of resources well used during the pandemic to support the less well-off, small firms, etc. But that absorption of public debt will have to be repaid in the future in an environment of higher interest rates, of low growth, etc., that will generate important problems for governments. That implies that Latin America, and many people have said it in the way that Latin America needs a new social contract, needs a new social contract that restarts growth and job creation, but needs a new social contract that implies a much more redistributed fiscal policy. It needs a new social contract that continues to strengthen the institutions to provide better services to all of the population, and this in an environment in which we're facing high inflation that is affecting the poor the most, because it is also coming from food and other basic consumer goods that affects lower income families the most. So this new social contract that people are talking about is basically a social contract that tries to strengthen the dynamism of the economy by allowing the private sector to invest, to create jobs, and to make our economy stronger, but at the same time strengthen the state, strengthens public institutions, so that through these institutions we can have better public education, better health, better opportunities for the less well-off, and create a much more dynamic society, better security for everybody in society as well. And I think in the creation of the consensus to put together the pieces of what a new social contract will imply, religious institutions can play a major role to achieve that. To close, I think there are two extremely important regional and worldwide phenomenon that Latin America will have to contribute to the solutions to these problems in the next decades. One of them is obviously climate change, in which the region still needs to step forward with a much more a holistic approach on how to fight climate change in low and middle income countries where other social urgencies are also very, very important. And finally, the issue of migration. I mean, we have many migration paths in Latin America nowadays, obviously from Central America, Mexico to the US, the huge Venezuelan migration that has taken place in the last 7 years, the Haitians that have moved towards, I mean, other Central American countries, Mexico and South American countries. So in that sense, I think the migration agenda in Latin America should take a center stage in the current discussions at the Summit of the Americas and should form a very important pillar for the region to treat migrants in a humane way, but also for countries to take advantage of this pool of human capital and use it as the official from the city of Los Angeles was telling us, basically as a source of vigor and dynamism for our economies, and as a source of social cohesion and inclusiveness in our societies. So with that, just to reiterate my thanks for the invitation to be part of this very important forum.
Forum, but in upcoming events, because the challenge of building a new social agreement in the region is a priority, and the values that we share are essential for
para la construcción de ese nuevo contrato social. Bueno, ahora para cerrar ya nuestro panel, pero no por ello menos importante, queremos invitar al embajador Rashad Hussain. Él es el embajador para la libertad religiosa internacional del Departamento de Estado aquí en los Estados Unidos. Seguramente todos nosotros en alguna oportunidad hemos consultado el Informe Internacional de Libertad Religiosa que anualmente emite el Departamento de Estado. Recientemente, esta semana, ha sido publicado el informe del año pasado, de modo tal que todos conocemos desde hace ya mucho tiempo a la Oficina de Libertad Religiosa Internacional del Departamento de Estado, pero que además también se preocupa del involucramiento de las comunidades religiosas en asuntos religiosos globales. Y es un honor para nosotros, embajador, contar con su presencia esta mañana. Por favor.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you all here for the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. I want to thank Religions for Peace. Religions for Peace has been a tremendous partner for me since I began working in government back in the Obama administration, and we've worked together on addressing so many national and international priorities. I also want to thank all the tremendous civil society organizations that have brought us together today and for your partnership in so many areas. I'm very much encouraged today. I'm very much encouraged by the forum. I'm very much encouraged by the movement that we see around the world, in which religious leaders and religion is being used as a force for good. We see new participants every day in the work that we're doing. In the course of a day, the work that we do in government, you can imagine that there are so many civil society organizations that are doing work on such a large range of priority areas for us. And now we're increasingly seeing governments that are appointing officials at senior levels to engage with religious leaders, to engage with multilateral organizations, including religious organizations. And we have now seen such a large growth in the area of international religious freedom. So many special rapporteurs, special envoys, ambassadors being appointed in this area. We have an International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, which is now comprised of 35 members, and we see more and more countries that are interested in joining. On behalf of President Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, the United States government and the American people, I want to thank you all for all of the commitments that you're making to advancing the core goal of this 9th Summit of Americas. I've been able to see firsthand throughout my career the role that religious leaders have played in advancing critical foreign policy objectives all around the world. I'll be very honest. People ask me sometimes, and they say, well, how can you be optimistic? How can you be so encouraged? And how can you speak so positively about the role of faith and religious leaders around the world? Look at the state of the world. And the reality is that I would hate to imagine a world in which religion and religious leaders were not inspiring so many people to do good and preventing so much harm. But there is potential to do so much more. And when we think about the role of religion, oftentimes we talk about religious leaders and how can we work with religious leaders on vaccine hesitancy, for example, or in addressing poverty, and that's all true. But we shouldn't just credit religious leaders for all that outstanding work that is being done. The reality is that any time a person anywhere in the world is motivated by something positive that they learned as a part of their religious upbringing, that's not to say that religion is the only source of morality in the world. It's not exclusively the source of morality in the world. But it does play a powerful role. And anytime somebody does something good because of something that they learned even at a young age or some value that was instilled in them, they could go on to be the inventor of some of the most important items that we use on a day-to-day basis. They could be the inventors of a vaccine that's used to cure the pandemic. They may not be on a day-to-day basis what we often consider a religious person, but the fact that they at some point in their life have been inspired or raised with or been exposed to good values that have come somewhere from within religion is something that we have to acknowledge. And so that's important to keep in mind as we stay encouraged in the work that we're doing. Of course, we also have to acknowledge that there is a lot of work to do to address those who would use religion, who would exploit religion to do harm. But I think that we've spoken at length and done so much work around the world to make sure that we are using and seeing religion as a powerful force for good. The summit that we're here for centers on the bedrock of all our societies, and that is, as I've been talking about, people. And here in Los Angeles, a city that represents the diversity of our hemisphere, we are gathered to give a platform to millions of people across the Americas so that our region's democracies can deliver a more sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous future. As has been mentioned a number of times already earlier today, Los Angeles is one of the most culturally and diverse culturally and religiously diverse cities in the world. And so it may seem as, Los Angeles could even be seen as a hemisphere unto itself. But we see here more than 100 faiths in a population whose roots stretch all around the world. So it's appropriate that Los Angeles is hosting this important gathering. We cannot advance the goals of the summit without our partnerships with civil society, specifically religious actors and faith-based institutions inside and outside the region. The people of the Americas are inextricably linked. What happens in the larger region impacts the United States. The focus of this forum, the vital role of religious communities in advancing our efforts to encourage strong, inclusive, and accountable democracies, drives the work of our office. Along with advancing religious freedom, something that you may not know is that our office includes a strategic religious engagement unit, which seeks to ensure that the United States government develops partnerships and relationships with the broadest range of civil society that has equitable and meaningful inclusion of faith actors globally on a wide range of critical foreign policy priorities. So you may have seen just last week, we announced the release of our International Religious Freedom Report, which is over 2,600 pages documenting the state of religious freedom in every country around the world. And that is a critical part of what we do. It is a principle on which the United States was founded, religious freedom. It is in the First Amendment of our Constitution. As a country of immigrants, we have people that come to the United States all over the world and are deeply concerned and interested in what is going on in the countries from which they came. They're deeply interested in advocating for religious freedom. And so when people ask me this question, who is the United States to seek to be the judge or to seek to evaluate what's going on in terms of religious freedom around the world? It's actually the American people that have come here from all over the world that care so deeply, that push their representatives to say, we need to take into account and we need to assess what's happening all around the world. But in addition to that report, as part of the religious leader engagement work that we're doing, we're trying to advance national and global priorities in so many areas, and building peace, addressing climate change, advancing development and humanitarian efforts, promoting global health. We've spoken about addressing vaccine hesitancy, for example, combating violence against women and girls, promoting social justice around the world, combating poverty. The list goes on and on and on. And the United States government understands with increasing depth how working with religious actors can advance effective response to overcome these global challenges. And we see all of this work going on in our hemisphere. In recent years, I'll give you a few examples. Our diplomats have engaged with evangelical and Catholic churches to address threats to society posed by criminal gangs in our hemisphere. Our U.S. mission to Venezuela, for example, continues to maintain close contact with clergy and other religious groups in the country to discuss the political, economic, and humanitarian crises in Venezuela. In Brazil, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have worked with religious communities to build confidence regarding COVID-19 vaccines. And this past year, my office co-hosted a virtual discussion with the United States Institute of Peace on incorporating religious sensitivity in trauma healing for migrants and refugees in South America. Currently, we're also in conversation with indigenous activists and community leaders on how to bring attention to and protect ancestral spiritual traditions in the Western Hemisphere. So these are just a few examples of efforts that bring together governments and religious actors of various faith backgrounds. There are so many pressing issues that would benefit from diplomats and faith actors working together to address the themes of the summit, especially to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. One of these three stand out that I'd like to discuss a little bit in more detail: the climate crisis, health and pandemic resilience, and migration. Our collective future depends on our ability to confront the climate crisis, and the hemisphere can be a leader as an example to the world. Because those most affected by climate change are often the most vulnerable, this commitment must emphasize stakeholder engagement with their communities, including indigenous people, Afro-descendant populations, women and girls, and others. Religious actors can help mitigate the negative impact of the climate crisis by uplifting the voices of those who do not normally have a voice, and by modeling sustainability. We must all work together to ensure our response to climate change fosters a more peaceful and sustainable world. COVID-19 and other health challenges that have ravaged communities in the region continue to demonstrate that our future is indeed shared. The United States government is aware of and concerned about the drastic effects of COVID-19 and the damage it's causing to communities across the Americas. This year, USAID launched an official partnership with the multi-faith movement, Faith for Vaccines, to promote a COVID-19 year of action. It is through partnerships and collaborative efforts that solutions are found, especially by governments working with religious institutions and civil society. Our hemisphere's political, health, and economic challenges drive people to leave their home countries in search of better opportunities elsewhere. This has spurred cyclical, irregular mass migration in the region. As we continue to implement the U.S. strategy for addressing the root causes of migration in Central America, religious leaders and their communities remain critical on-the-ground actors throughout the migratory systems in the regions, working to address root causes of migration and promoting protection, regularization, and integration of migrants unable to return to their home countries. Each theme weighs most heavily on the most vulnerable and most unrepresented and presents challenges that are already driving conflict. The United States is committed to collaborating with and listening to religious institutions and civil society to promptly help the people of our hemisphere create new, inclusive opportunities. This forum and discussions that follow today and tomorrow will strengthen the many ways government representatives can work together with diverse voices to address the hemisphere's diverse challenges. Only equitable and inclusive engagement can address summit priorities and meet our hemisphere's practical needs. Working together, so much of this is possible. So thank you so much for including me at the second Interreligious Forum, and thank you for your partnerships and your contributions. I'm excited to imagine the heights to which our collective efforts will take us going forward. Through your work, we can ensure that Western Hemisphere models for the world the ways in which democracies deliver more resilient, sustainable, and equitable futures. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Bueno, nos quedamos sin tiempo para las preguntas y respuestas. Quizás habrá oportunidad en las sucesivas sesiones de poder quizás dialogar un poco más entre todos.